The wind, a relentless sculptor, carved the dust into ghostly spirals across the parched plains, and Alara rode within its heart, a solitary figure dwarfed by the immensity of the sky. Her ranch, a cluster of stoic wood and sun-baked earth, lay miles behind her, an outpost against the unforgiving wild, and yet it felt as hollow as her own bones. Each gust carried not only grit but the echoes of absence, a profound quietude that had settled deep in her marrow since the last of her kin had been swallowed by the same indifferent land. She lived by the rhythm of the sun and the needs of her dwindling herd, her hands calloused, her gaze distant, reflecting the vast, empty horizon. Survival was a grim dance she knew well, but loneliness was the true adversary, a slow, quiet poison that seeped into every waking moment and haunted her sparse dreams. She rode for supplies, for anything to break the monotony of her solitary vigil, a grim pilgrimage to the nearest speck of civilization, a town barely more than a wide spot in the trail, where desperation often traded hands with even greater desperation. The air in the makeshift marketplace was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and the sharp tang of desperation. Merchants hawked their wares with the frantic energy of men clinging to the edge of ruin. Alara moved through the throng, her movements economical, her eyes missing nothing, yet betraying little. She sought grain, rope, perhaps a fresh tool for a failing fence. Her path took her past a cluster of ragged onlookers, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and quiet disgust, gathered around a small, roped-off square. A man, slick-haired and with a voice like a whetstone, stood on a crate, gesturing theatrically. 3 souls, ripe for honest work, strong backs, willing hearts. A bargain, I tell you, a true bargain for the discerning buyer. Alara paused, her hand instinctively resting on the worn leather of her saddle. Her gaze followed the man's pointing finger to the center of the square. There, huddled together like abandoned pups, were 3 small figures. Their heads were covered with coarse burlap sacks, tied loosely at the neck, obscuring their faces entirely. Their small, still bodies trembled slightly, a testament to the heat, the dust, and the terror of their situation. A wave of cold revulsion washed over Alara. She had seen much brutality in her life, but the sight of human beings reduced to shrouded bundles for sale struck her with a visceral ache that resonated with her own deep-seated solitude. This was not the kind of emptiness she sought to fill. Her first instinct was to turn, to ride away, to put as much distance as possible between herself and this grim spectacle. But something held her. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, of the abject vulnerability, the utter lack of agency. It was a mirror, distorted yet true, of her own powerlessness against the forces that had stripped her life bare. The auctioneer's voice grated, cutting through the thin veneer of her composure. Who will give me a fair price for these diligent hands? For these investments? Alara felt a peculiar, unsettling pull. It was a dangerous, irrational thought, but the desolate emptiness of her ranch, of her life, suddenly felt more unbearable than the risk of this unforeseen burden. She took a single, decisive step forward, her voice cutting through the murmuring crowd, stark and clear like the strike of flint. I will. A hush fell over the crowd, their gazes shifting from the shrouded children to the lean, dust-worn woman who had spoken. The auctioneer's practiced smile faltered for a moment, surprised by the unexpected bid from a woman who looked more like a weathered piece of the landscape than a potential buyer of human flesh. Alara ignored their stares, her eyes fixed on the 3 small forms, who seemed to shrink further into themselves at the sound of her voice. The bidding was brief, hesitant. No one seemed eager to compete against a woman whose silent presence commanded more respect than any shouted threat. She named her price, a sum that would mean weeks, perhaps months of careful budgeting, a gamble she couldn't afford but felt compelled to make. The auctioneer, sensing a quick sale and perhaps a lingering discomfort in the air, quickly brought down his gavel. Sold. To the lady. Alara walked towards them, her boots scuffing softly in the dust. As she neared, the smallest of the 3, barely a bundle, stirred. A muffled sound, a ragged breath, then a thin, reedy sob pierced the quiet. It was almost imperceptible, a mere whisper of despair, but it was enough. The sound tore through the last vestiges of her carefully constructed detachment. Then, a voice, young and desperate, choked with tears and fear, pushed through the coarse fabric of the sack. "Please, don't separate us. Please, mister, don't separate us." The words, raw and unadorned, struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. Mister, they thought she was a man. Hidden beneath the wide brim of her hat, the practical cut of her clothes, and the plea, "Don't separate us." It was not a plea for freedom, but for connection, for the preservation of the only fragment of family they had left. The fear in that small voice, the agony of potential abandonment, was an echo of her own deepest dread. The ache in her chest intensified, no longer a dull throb of loneliness, but a sharp, undeniable pain of recognition. This was not about purchasing labor. This was about saving something, however small, however fragile, from complete destruction. Her hand, calloused and strong, hesitated for a moment, then reached out, not to grasp, but to touch the shoulder of the weeping child. The rough fabric of the sack yielded under her fingers. Her voice, though still low, carried a new, unfamiliar resonance. "I won't. I promise you, I won't separate you." She turned to the auctioneer, her eyes flint hard. "And I'll take all three of them now." The man, visibly uncomfortable, quickly untied the rope that bound the children. Alara gathered the meager documents, a perfunctory exchange of ownership, and led the three silent, shrouded figures away from the marketplace, away from the judging eyes, towards the waiting expanse of the open land. The journey home had begun, a trek laden not with empty saddlebags, but with a new, unforeseen weight, a burden she had willingly taken on, driven by a plea that had pierced the armor of her solitary existence. They rode in near silence, the only sounds the creak of the saddle leather, the rhythmic thud of the horses' hooves on the dry earth, and the ceaseless whisper of the wind. Alara had them ride behind her, their small ponies tethered to her own, a silent statement of control and protection. The sun beat down relentlessly, raising dust devils that danced across the plain like mischievous spirits. After an hour, Alara pulled her horse to a stop beneath the meager shade of a lone, wind-battered cottonwood tree. "We'll rest here for a spell," she announced, her voice rough, unaccustomed to anything but the commands for her horses. The children dismounted slowly, hesitantly, still swaddled in their burlap shrouds. The smallest one, the one who had cried, stumbled, and Alara reached out a steadying hand, guiding him to the trunk. "It's hot," she said, her gaze fixed on the lumpy shapes of their covered heads. "You can take those off, if you like." There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then a slight tremor ran through the smallest figure. Hesitantly, a tiny hand lifted to the rough fabric, fumbling with the knot. Alara watched, unmoving, giving them space. The first sack came off, revealing a boy, no older than 7 or 8. His face streaked with dirt and dried tears, his eyes wide, startlingly blue, and filled with a profound weariness that belied his youth. He was the one who had cried. His gaze darted to Alara, then to the other two still shrouded figures. He was thin, almost skeletal, his dark hair matted. The next sack came off, revealing a girl, perhaps 5, her face round and smudged, her eyes a deep, watchful brown. Her lower lip trembled, but no sound escaped her. Finally, the third sack. This one revealed an older boy, maybe 10 or 11, with a solemn, unreadable expression. His jaw was set, his eyes dark, intelligent, and fiercely protective as they scanned their surroundings, then fixed on Alara. He bore the weight of responsibility like a shield. "What are your names?" Alara asked, keeping her voice even, devoid of any expectation. The smallest boy, the blue-eyed one, swallowed hard. "Caleb," he whispered, his voice still thin. The girl remained silent, clinging to Caleb's side. The older boy, after a moment's hesitation, spoke, his voice deeper than Alara expected. "Thomas. And this is Lily," he gestured to the little girl. Alara nodded, committing the names to memory. "I'm Alara," She offered them water from her canteen, watching as they drank deeply, almost ferociously. She then produced a meager piece of dry jerky and a hard biscuit, dividing it carefully among them. Thomas immediately gave a larger portion to Lily, then to Caleb before taking his own. Elara observed this without comment, a flicker of something akin to admiration stirring within her. These were not mere victims. They were survivors. The journey continued, quieter now, but with an underlying tension. Elara kept watch not just for dangers on the trail, but for the subtle shifts in their small group. Thomas remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning. Caleb, though still fragile, watched Elara with an intense, curious gaze. Lily, the youngest, slowly began to relax, occasionally leaning against Caleb during rest stops. Elara, for the first time in years, found herself actively engaged, not just in her own survival, but in the fragile trust of these three unexpected companions. The vast, empty plains now held a different kind of silence, one that was slowly, tentatively, beginning to fill with the soft hum of nascent human connection. The ranch rose from the dust like a sentinel, stark and unyielding, a testament to years of tireless toil and solitary endurance. Its weathered timbers and sun-baked adobe seemed to sigh under the immense sky, a quiet place that held both the ghosts of Elara's past and the stark reality of her present. The children, Thomas, Caleb, and Lily, dismounted by the corrals, their eyes wide and taking in the new, strange home that was so different from anything they had known. Lily whimpered softly, pressing against Caleb, but Thomas, ever the stoic protector, squeezed her hand reassuringly. Elara watched them, a knot of apprehension in her stomach. What had she done? What did she know of children, of tenderness, of building a home that wasn't just a fortified shell against the world? Her life had been a series of losses, each one hardening her further, leaving her an island. Now, she had brought 3 vulnerable souls to her lonely shore. But the silence of the ranch, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, demanding to be filled. She began, not with grand gestures, but with practicalities, the only language she truly knew. She showed them the well, taught them how to draw water, explained the purpose of the chicken coop, the worn saddles in the small barn. She spoke of chores, of responsibilities, of the rhythm of ranch life that bound one to the land. Thomas listened intently, his gaze unwavering, absorbing every word. Caleb, initially hesitant, soon mirrored Thomas's quiet attentiveness. Lily, still shy, clung to their sides, but her eyes, now free of the sacks, held a spark of curiosity. The days bled into weeks, each one a slow, measured dance of learning and adaptation. Elara taught them how to mend fences, how to feed the horses, how to gather eggs without breaking them. She taught them about the harsh beauty of the land, how to read the sky for rain, how to listen to the whispers of the wind. She saw in Thomas a burgeoning strength, a quiet resilience that reminded her of herself. He learned quickly, his hands becoming adept with tools, his body gaining muscle. He remained watchful, but his gaze, when it met Elara's, held a growing respect, a nascent trust. Caleb, though smaller, proved nimble and surprisingly sharp, his blue eyes missing nothing. He began to follow Elara like a shadow, asking quiet questions, eager to understand. He was the one who would sometimes offer a small, shy smile, a fleeting gesture that brought an unexpected warmth to Elara's stern face. Lily, the youngest, blossomed under the protective umbrella of her brothers and Elara's unspoken care. She chased chickens, picked wildflowers, and filled the ranch with the sounds of childish laughter, a sound Elara had not heard in decades. The ranch, once a monument to her solitude, slowly began to transform. The emptiness that had gnawed at Elara's soul began to recede, replaced by the quiet, comforting presence of these 3 children. There were no grand declarations, no emotional outpourings. Their connection was forged in shared labor, in the dust and sweat of the day, in the quiet companionship around a crackling fire at night. Elara found a new purpose, not just in her own survival, but in nurturing theirs, in building a future that was no longer hers alone. She still rode the plains, but now, the wind carried not the echoes of absence, but the faint, hopeful sounds of children's voices, carried on the breeze from the ranch house. The harsh land remained, but it no longer felt like an adversary. It was a foundation. She, Alara, the lonely cowgirl who had bought 3 orphans with sacks on their heads, had found not just new hands for her ranch, but new hearts for her own, beating a quiet, resilient rhythm against the vast, indifferent sky. They were not a conventional family, perhaps, but they were a family nonetheless, bound by an unspoken promise and the undeniable strength found in a shared journey from desperation to a quiet, enduring hope.